Hello, my name is Bonnie. I am a student of English, and today I want to tell you my story, my journey of learning to speak English better. It was not always easy, but I found ways that worked for me. Maybe my story can help you too. I used to be scared to speak even one sentence in English, but now I can talk to people with confidence, and I didn't need to leave my home to learn it. At first, I didn't know where to start. When I decided that I wanted to speak English better, I felt overwhelmed by all the rules, vocabulary, and grammar. It seemed like there was so much to learn, and I didn't know if I could ever understand it all. I also felt a bit scared. What if I never sounded as good as the people I heard on TV? But then I remembered something important. Language learning doesn't always have to begin with speaking or even reading. It begins with listening. I decided to start listening every day. I didn't have a plan, and I didn't try to understand every single word. In fact, I didn't even focus on understanding everything. I just listened to the sounds, the rhythm, and the flow of English. I played English music, watched YouTube videos, and listened to podcasts. Sometimes I would hear a word I recognized, and other times it was all just a blur of sounds. At first, I couldn't catch most of what was being said. There were so many words I didn't know, and even the ones I did know seemed to be spoken too quickly for me to understand. But I didn't stop. I started to realize that even when I didn't understand a word or phrase, it didn't matter that much. I was getting used to hearing English. It became normal to hear people speak in English, even if the words felt strange. My brain was becoming more familiar with the language. I felt like I was training my ears. The more I listened, the more comfortable I became with the sounds of English. It was like learning to dance without worrying about the steps at first. I didn't need to know all the steps to enjoy the music. I just needed to be in the rhythm of it. One of the most powerful moments came when I realized that I was starting to understand certain phrases without even thinking. I was walking through the house one day and I heard a sentence from the TV. "What's for dinner?" I hadn't studied that phrase, but for some reason I understood it. It was a simple sentence, but it made me feel so excited. Even though I couldn't understand everything, I could feel progress happening. I wasn't just listening to words anymore. I was starting to understand them. That moment gave me hope. It made me realize that even though it seemed slow at the start, progress was happening. Listening every day didn't just help me understand English. It helped me get used to the language itself. I could hear the tone of voice, the pauses, and the way words changed depending on the speaker's mood. This was something that books couldn't teach me. It wasn't just about memorizing vocabulary or grammar rules. It was about absorbing the language, feeling it. It was about training my mind to think in English. Over time, it became easier to recognize familiar words and even to guess the meaning of words I didn't know by listening carefully to how they were used. And so, my daily listening practice became a habit. I did it every day, without fail. I didn't worry about being perfect, and I didn't worry about understanding every word. I knew that the more I listened, the more I would understand. It wasn't a race. It was a journey. The more I listened, the more I felt ready to move to the next step in my learning process. After a few months of listening to English every day, something began to shift inside me. I could now recognize more words, and I understood the flow of conversation better than before. But there was still one thing that held me back: speaking. Every time I tried to speak English out loud, I felt afraid. My heart raced, my hands got sweaty, and I worried about making mistakes. What if people didn't understand me? What if I said something wrong? These thoughts made me feel like I wasn't ready to speak in front of others, but I knew I had to get over that fear, or I would never truly improve. One day, I realized that I didn't need to speak in front of anyone just yet. I could practice speaking in the safety of my own space, alone, where no one could judge me. The idea seemed simple, but at the same time, it felt a little strange. How could talking to myself help me get better at English? But I was willing to try anything, and I knew that this would be a way to build my confidence slowly, without any pressure. At first, it felt awkward. I stood in front of the mirror in my room and tried to talk out loud. I am Bonnie. I like to learn English, I said to myself. The words felt forced, and I felt silly. But then, something surprising happened. The more I spoke, the less awkward it became. I started to say small sentences, simple things like what I did that day, what I ate for lunch, or how I was feeling. Say. It was sunny, and I saw a dog. The dog was very cute. I didn't focus on speaking perfectly. I didn't worry about whether the sentences were right. I just wanted to get used to the act of speaking. As I continued to talk to myself, I began to notice a shift. I wasn't just practicing English, I was also building a kind of trust with myself. Talking to myself helped me feel less afraid of making mistakes. I could say whatever I wanted without anyone correcting me or laughing at me. If I said something wrong, it was okay. I could correct myself and then keep going. I realized that I didn't need to be perfect to practice. I just needed to speak. One day, I decided to take it a step further. I wasn't just going to talk about my day or repeat things I'd heard from videos. I started to have real conversations with myself. What do you like to do in your free time? I asked myself. And then I would answer, I like to read books. I also like to watch movies. I enjoy listening to music too. It felt like I was having an actual conversation with a friend, but in this case, that friend was me. It might sound strange, but it really helped. By practicing this way, I became more comfortable with the flow of language. I could hear myself speaking, and I could hear if something didn't sound right. If I stumbled, I'd pause, think for a moment, and try again. The more I did this, the easier it became. I started to speak with more confidence. I was learning to express my thoughts in English, even if those thoughts were simple. I didn't worry so much about my mistakes anymore. In fact, I started to look forward to making mistakes. They were a sign that I was pushing myself. Every mistake was a chance to learn, to improve, and to get closer to the goal I had set for myself. One day, as I was speaking out loud in my room, I noticed something different. I wasn't just repeating phrases I had heard in videos anymore. I was creating my own sentences. I was forming my own ideas and expressing them in English. I think English is an interesting language, I said to myself. And I believe if I keep practicing, I can speak it well. That's when I realized I wasn't just practicing the language anymore. I was using the language. I was thinking in English. And that made all the difference. Of course, there were times when I still felt unsure. There were times when I felt like I wasn't improving fast enough or that I wasn't speaking as well as I wanted to. But when those doubts crept in, I reminded myself of how far I had come. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about making progress every single day. And the more I practiced speaking, the more comfortable I became with using English in my everyday life. I started talking to myself in different situations. I'd describe what I was doing while cooking. Now, I'm chopping the vegetables. I will cook the pasta. Or, I would talk to myself when I was cleaning the house. I'm wiping the table. It's looking clean now. Even though no one was listening, I knew I was building a habit that would make speaking English feel more natural. It wasn't about sitting down to study. It was about finding ways to weave English into my life. Every time I spoke, even if it was just for a few minutes, I was improving. But then, something amazing happened. As I grew more comfortable talking to myself, I felt a little braver. One day, I had to call my aunt on the phone, and I felt nervous. It was the first time I had to speak English outside my home. My aunt lived in another city, and I hadn't talked to her in a while. But I remembered all the practice I had done, talking to myself. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. "Hi, Aunt Laura," I said. "How are you?" To my surprise, the conversation went smoothly. I didn't panic. I was able to express myself clearly, and when I made a mistake, I corrected it without feeling embarrassed. Talking to myself had given me the confidence to take that first step. It was like preparing for a performance in private before stepping onto a stage in front of others. And that's exactly what speaking English with myself had been: practice. It wasn't easy, but it worked. I was starting to feel like I was ready to speak more in front of other people. After months of practicing by myself, I started to feel more confident in my English skills. I was able to understand more, and I could speak the language more naturally than I ever had before. However, there was something missing, something that I knew was a key part of truly improving my spoken English: speaking with another person. I had spent so much time talking to myself in the safety of my own room, but the next step in my journey was to interact with someone who was also learning English. I realized that I needed a speaking partner, someone who could help me practice, correct me when I made mistakes, and most importantly, encourage me to keep going. At first, the idea of speaking with another learner was both exciting and terrifying. On the one hand, I was eager to practice with someone else. It felt like the next logical step in my learning process. But on the other hand, I was nervous. What if I made a mistake in front of someone else? What if they judged me? The fears I had when I first started speaking out loud resurfaced, but I knew that if I truly wanted to improve, I needed to push through those fears. So I began to look for someone who was also learning English. It didn't take long for me to find Mia. We had met in an online forum for English learners, and after chatting a few times, we both realized we had similar goals: to improve our spoken English. We came from different backgrounds. She lived in a small town in Mexico, and I lived in the United States. But we both shared a passion for learning the language. We decided to schedule our first practice session, and I was nervous but excited. This was the moment when I would finally get to speak with someone else in English, someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be learning a new language. When we first spoke, I remember feeling a bit shaky. We agreed to keep things simple, to start by talking about our daily lives. Mia told me about her family, how she had been studying English for about a year, and what she liked to do in her free time. I tried to respond, but my words came out slower than I wanted them to. My mind was racing, and I kept worrying about getting the sentences right. But then, I remembered something important. This was a learning process, and it was okay if I didn't speak perfectly. The goal was not to be flawless. It was to communicate. To my surprise, Mia was incredibly patient and encouraging. Every time I made a mistake, she would gently correct me, not in a critical way, but in a way that helped me understand where I had gone wrong. I realized that we were both learning together. The conversation wasn't about being perfect, it was about understanding each other and making progress. We weren't competing. We were supporting each other. Mia told me that she also felt nervous about speaking, but we both agreed that practicing together was the best way to overcome our fears. I quickly learned that speaking with Mia helped me in ways I hadn't expected. For one, I was able to learn new vocabulary. Sometimes, Mia would use words that I didn't know, and I'd ask her what they meant. She'd explain them in simple English, which made the word easier to understand. I would do the same for her. This exchange of words and phrases made me realize how much I could learn from someone who was in the same situation as me. We weren't just practicing grammar or vocabulary, we were learning how to speak English in real-life situations. I also began to notice something amazing. My fear of making mistakes was slowly fading away. Before I met Mia, I had been terrified of speaking incorrectly. But now I saw mistakes as opportunities to learn. Every time I stumbled over a word or made a mistake in a sentence, Mia would correct me, and I would understand why I made the error. It was no longer a moment of embarrassment. It was a step forward. We both understood that mistakes were part of the learning process, and that helped me to relax. In fact, I looked forward to speaking more because I knew I was improving every time I practiced. As our conversations continued, I found myself becoming more comfortable with speaking in English. It didn't matter if we were talking about something simple, like the weather, or something more complex, like our dreams for the future. We spoke about everything: our favorite foods, our cultural differences, our families, and our goals for learning English. It was during these conversations that I realized how much I had grown. At the beginning of my journey, I had been afraid to speak at all. Now I was speaking freely, not worrying about making mistakes, but enjoying the process of conversation itself. Over time, Mia and I made a habit of speaking regularly. We set a goal to have at least one practice session every week. We would talk about different topics each time, and sometimes we would even do role-playing exercises. For example, one day we practiced ordering food at a restaurant. Mia would pretend to be the waiter, and I would be the customer. Another day, we practiced making small talk at a party. It was fun, and it helped me see how important it was to practice real-life situations. Speaking wasn't just about memorizing vocabulary, it was about knowing how to use it in everyday conversations. As much as I learned from Mia, I also noticed that speaking with her made me more aware of my own learning style. I realized that I preferred practicing in short bursts rather than long, drawn-out conversations. That helped me focus better and avoid feeling overwhelmed. But I also learned that it was okay to take breaks during our sessions. If I felt tired or frustrated, I would let Mia know, and we would take a short pause. This made our conversations more relaxed, and I was able to speak more confidently. One of the most rewarding parts of practicing with Mia was seeing how much we both improved over time. In the beginning, we both struggled with certain words or sentence structures. But as we kept practicing, we both became more fluent. Mia's confidence grew, and so did mine. It was incredible to see how much progress we had made. We started to speak faster, with fewer pauses. We began to understand each other more easily. And even when we didn't know a word, we could often guess its meaning based on context. By the time we had been speaking together for several months, something incredible happened. I was able to hold conversations in English without thinking too much about the words. It felt natural. I wasn't translating everything in my head anymore. I was speaking from my heart. And that's when I realized that the key to speaking English fluently wasn't about perfection. It was about practice, patience, and being willing to make mistakes along the way. By the time I had spent a few months practicing with Mia, I had grown significantly in my confidence and ability to speak English. I had come a long way from the timid girl who was afraid to say a word in public, to someone who was regularly holding conversations and making fewer mistakes. But there was still one thing I needed to address: staying consistent and motivated. Sure, I had made progress, but learning a language is a long journey, and I needed to find ways to keep myself engaged. That's when I realized something powerful. I didn't have to practice English in a traditional way. I could use the things I loved most to keep learning. I started thinking about my favorite hobbies, my favorite books, movies, and even music, and I realized that these things could become powerful tools for practicing English. After all, when you're learning a language, it helps if the learning process feels enjoyable. So I made the decision to combine my passion for things like reading, watching movies, and listening to music with my efforts to improve my English. First, I began by immersing myself in English books. I've always been a huge fan of fantasy, novels, stories that take me to new worlds filled with magic and adventure. But I realized that reading books in English could help me build my vocabulary and improve my understanding of sentence structure. So I picked up my favorite fantasy series in English, a book I had already read many times in Spanish, my first language. I had a feeling that since I already knew the plot and characters so well, reading it in English would be a little easier. At first, it wasn't easy at all. The English version of the book was filled with words I didn't know. There were phrases and idioms I had never encountered before, but I didn't give up. Every time I came across a word I didn't understand, I would look it up in my dictionary or use an online translation tool. I even started writing the new words down in a notebook, along with their meanings and examples of how they were used in the sentences. This became part of my daily routine, and after a while, I noticed something amazing. I was able to read faster. I wasn't translating every word in my head anymore. My mind was becoming accustomed to the rhythm and flow of English, and I was starting to understand the meaning behind the sentences without having to pause to look up every word. The more I read, the more I realized how much my vocabulary was expanding. English words that once seemed foreign to me were becoming familiar. I could feel the difference when I was speaking with Mia or practicing on my own. I could use some of the new words I had learned from the books in my conversations. I didn't just know the meaning of the words. I understood how they fit into sentences, how they helped to express different feelings and ideas. This was an incredible feeling. In addition to books, I also turned to another one of my favorite pastimes: watching movies. I have always loved films, especially comedy and drama. I realized that watching movies in English could be an entertaining way to improve my listening skills. So I started watching movies without subtitles, challenging myself to understand everything based on what I could hear. At first, I missed a lot of details. The actors spoke quickly, and sometimes I couldn't catch every word, but I kept going. I would rewatch the movies and listen carefully to the parts I didn't understand the first time. And when I didn't understand something, I would look up the words or phrases online. Watching movies became a fun, immersive way to practice. I learned how native speakers used everyday phrases, how they expressed emotions through tone and body language, and how they used slang or casual speech. This helped me understand the language in real-world contexts. I also realized that watching movies helped me work on my pronunciation. I would mimic the actors' lines, trying to match their accents and speech patterns. Sometimes, I would pause the movie, repeat the lines out loud, and then play them again to hear if I sounded similar. This exercise helped me get the hang of English pronunciation, which is something I had struggled with in the beginning, but it wasn't just movies and books that helped me improve. I also discovered that music could be a fantastic tool for language learning. Music has always been a part of my life, and I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of using it earlier in my English journey. I have always loved pop music, and I started listening to songs by American artists. I paid close attention to the lyrics, trying to understand the meaning behind the words. If I didn't understand something, I would look up the lyrics and see if I could figure out what the singer was trying to say. What I found amazing about learning through music was that it helped me with both listening and speaking. I began to sing along with the songs, which improved my pronunciation. The catchy melodies helped me remember phrases and words, and before I knew it, I was singing entire songs in English without even thinking. Some of the songs I already knew from before, but hearing them in English made them feel fresh and exciting again. It was as though the language was becoming more and more a part of me, a part of the things I already loved. In addition to listening to music, I began to play with the language in different ways. For example, I started writing my own short stories, based on the things I read or saw in movies. These stories were not perfect, but they were mine. Writing allowed me to experiment with new vocabulary, sentence structures, and expressions. I could express myself creatively, which made the whole learning process more enjoyable. I didn't stress about making mistakes in my writing because I knew I was learning through trial and error. As I continued to use my favorite things to practice, I noticed an incredible shift in my mindset. Learning English was no longer a chore or something I had to work hard at. It had become a part of my life, a part of the things I loved to do. Whether I was reading a book, watching a movie, or singing along to a song, I was practicing English without even realizing it. It also helped me realize that language learning doesn't have to be boring or rigid. You don't need to sit in a classroom for hours or study grammar rules until your head hurts. You can make learning fun. You can make it a part of your everyday routine. And by doing so, you'll not only improve your English skills, but you'll also fall in love with the process. As I look back at my journey, there's one thing that stands out above all else: the importance of making mistakes. I had come a long way in my English learning, but there were still moments when I would stumble, hesitate, or say things that didn't quite sound right. I still remember the first time I tried to have a conversation in English with someone I didn't know. Well, it was a big deal for me, and I had prepared for days. I had gone over some basic phrases, listened to my favorite songs to practice pronunciation, and even memorized a few sentences to break the ice. I thought I was ready, but when the moment came, I froze. I couldn't remember some of the words I had practiced. I mixed up a couple of tenses, and I even mispronounced a few words. The person I was talking to didn't seem to notice, but I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. I wanted to disappear. I remember feeling embarrassed and thinking that I was failing. I wanted to stop speaking, to quit, but I didn't. I forced myself to finish the conversation, even though it wasn't perfect. When it was over, I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. I had tried, but I still felt like I wasn't good enough. In the days that followed, I considered giving up. It would be so easy to fall back into my comfort zone where I didn't have to worry about making mistakes or being judged, but something inside me wouldn't let me stop. I thought about everything I had learned so far, the hours spent reading, listening to music, talking to myself, and even practicing with Mia. I had come so far, and I wasn't about to let one bad conversation define me. I decided that I needed to change my perspective on mistakes. Instead of seeing them as failures, I needed to start viewing them as opportunities to grow. After all, I had made plenty of mistakes while learning my first language, Spanish, but that didn't stop me from speaking. I had been making mistakes in Spanish since I could remember, and yet I had become fluent. So why should it be any different? With English, I began to tell myself that making mistakes was part of the process. In fact, it was essential. If I didn't make mistakes, I wouldn't be learning. Every time I made a mistake, I was one step closer to getting better. This shift in mindset changed everything for me. I realized that I didn't have to be perfect to be successful. I just had to keep going, no matter what. From that point on, I started embracing my mistakes. When I mispronounced a word, I would laugh it off and correct myself. If I used the wrong tense, I would ask the person I was speaking with for help, and they would often be more than willing to explain. I learned that native English speakers weren't judging me. They were encouraging me. They knew that learning a language was a challenge, and they appreciated my effort to communicate. It wasn't just in conversations where I made mistakes. I would also make mistakes in my writing and reading. I remember once writing an essay for my English class. I thought it was great, but when I got it back, I was shocked to see all the red marks on it. I had missed several grammar rules, and there were awkward phrasing mistakes throughout the entire essay. At first, I felt crushed. I had worked so hard, and it felt like all my effort had been wasted. But then I took a deep breath and reread the comments my teacher had written. She hadn't been critical. She had given me constructive feedback, telling me how I could improve. She even pointed out some areas where I had done well, and instead of focusing on the mistakes, I decided to use them as a guide to do better next time. I spent the next few weeks reviewing my mistakes and practicing the grammar rules that had tripped me up. I also began reading more advanced English texts to improve my sentence structure. Through this process, I learned that making mistakes was a natural part of becoming fluent. It wasn't a sign that I wasn't good enough. It was a sign that I was on the right track. Mistakes meant that I was pushing myself beyond my comfort zone. They meant that I was trying, and trying is the most important part of learning. In fact, the more I made mistakes, the more confident I became. I realized that the fear of making mistakes had been holding me back for so long. Once I let go of that fear, I started speaking more freely and fluently. I didn't worry about whether I would make mistakes anymore. Instead, I focused on the conversation, on expressing myself clearly, and on enjoying the process. The more mistakes I made, the more opportunities I had to learn and improve. One of the most important lessons I learned during this time was that people don't remember your mistakes. as much as you think they do. Everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers. The key is to keep going, to keep speaking, and to keep trying. The more you speak, the more natural it becomes, and the fewer mistakes you make over time. But even if you do make mistakes, they're just stepping stones toward fluency. I remember one time when I was practicing with Mia, I was telling her about something I had read in a book and I accidentally mixed up two words. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I laughed and said, "Oops, I made a mistake." Mia smiled and said, "That's okay, Bonnie. You're doing great. We all make mistakes." Her words made me feel so much better, and it made me realize that people don't expect perfection. They expect effort. As time went on, I started to become more comfortable with the idea of making mistakes in front of others. I practiced speaking with friends and family, knowing that I wasn't perfect, but that I was doing my best. Sometimes I would mess up, but other times I would surprise myself with how much I had improved. I also began practicing with new people I met. It was scary at first. I would think, what, if I mess up? What if they don't understand me? But then I remembered all the progress I had made and told myself, just keep going. No one is perfect, and that's okay. I made mistakes, but I kept pushing through. And with every conversation, I got better. By this point in my journey, I had learned to embrace mistakes as part of the process. They didn't define me. Instead, they were the markers of growth. Every time I made a mistake, I had the chance to learn something new, whether it was a new word, a new phrase, or a better way to express myself. As I reflect on my entire journey to improving my spoken English, I can see how far I've come. There were times when I wanted to quit, times when I felt frustrated or embarrassed by my mistakes. But I didn't give up. I kept going. I kept listening, practicing, talking to myself, finding speaking partners, and using the things I loved to stay motivated. I made mistakes, yes, but I learned from them. I learned that mistakes are not something to fear. They are opportunities for growth. And now, looking back, I can say with confidence that the road to fluency isn't about being perfect. It's about persistence, passion, and embracing every part of the learning process, even the mistakes. Lesson: How to improve spoken English. Improving spoken English is a journey that requires patience, practice, and a positive mindset. In this lesson, I'll share some practical and effective steps that will help you improve your spoken English, just like Bonnie did in her journey. Remember, there's no quick fix, but with consistent effort, you can make great progress. Listen to English. Every day, the first step in improving your spoken English is to listen to it regularly. The more you listen to the language, the better you'll become at understanding how it sounds and how native speakers use it in different situations. Listening helps you pick up new words, phrases, and expressions that will make you sound more natural. How to do it. Listen to English music, podcasts, or audiobooks. Choose topics that interest you. For example, if you love cooking, listen to cooking podcasts in English. This will not only improve your language skills, but also make learning more fun. Watch English TV shows or movies. Pay attention to the way characters speak, their tone, and how they use different words. Turn on subtitles if needed, but try to gradually reduce your reliance on them. Listen and repeat. After hearing a sentence or phrase, pause and repeat it aloud. Focus on pronunciation and rhythm. This will help you get used to the natural flow of the language. Talk to yourself. One of the most powerful techniques for improving spoken English is to talk to yourself. I know it might sound a bit funny, but it's a very effective way to practice. It helps you build confidence, practice pronunciation, and organize your thoughts in English. How to do it. Describe your day. When you wake up or before you go to bed, describe everything you did during the day in English. For example, today I went to the store. I bought some fruits and vegetables. This helps you practice using sentences in a natural way. Think in English. Try to think in English as much as possible. Instead of translating from your first language, try to make simple sentences in your head in English. It may be difficult at first, but with time, it will become more natural. Practice common scenarios. Imagine you're ordering food at a restaurant or talking to a friend. Try to practice these situations in English. Even if you don't have someone to talk to, you can practice talking out loud to yourself. Find a speaking partner. Practicing with a friend or a speaking partner is one of the best ways to improve spoken English. It gives you real-world experience and allows you to learn how to communicate in different situations. How to do it? Language exchange. Find someone who speaks English and wants to learn your native language. You can set up regular video calls or meet in person to practice speaking English. Join online language groups. There are many websites and apps where you can meet people who want to practice English, such as Hello Talk, Tandem, or Speaky. Join English clubs or classes. If you can, join an English speaking club or take part in local conversation classes. Speaking in a group setting is a great way to practice English in a relaxed environment. 4. Use your favorite things to practice. English. Your hobbies and interests can be an excellent resource for improving your spoken English. By combining your passions with language learning, you'll stay motivated and have fun while practicing. How to do it? Watch shows or read books related to your hobbies. If you love sports, watch sports-related TV shows in English or read articles about your favorite teams. This will help you learn new vocabulary and become more familiar with different phrases. Speak about your hobbies. When you're talking to a friend or practicing on your own, focus on your hobbies. Talk about what you like to do, why you enjoy it, and how you do it. For example, if you love painting, you can say, "I love painting landscapes. It's so relaxing, and I enjoy using bright colors." Engage with English content in your area of interest. Whether it's cooking, traveling, or fashion, try to find English videos or podcasts related to what you enjoy. This will not only improve your English, but also allow you to talk about things you care about. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. One of the biggest barriers to improving spoken English is the fear of making mistakes. But the truth is, everyone makes mistakes when learning a language. Making mistakes is a sign that you're trying, and it's an essential part of the learning process. How to overcome the fear of making mistakes? Embrace your mistakes. Every time you make a mistake, see it as an opportunity to learn. Don't be afraid to speak just because you might make an error. The more mistakes you make, the more you'll improve. Ask for feedback. If you're speaking with a friend or tutor, don't hesitate to ask for feedback on your pronunciation or grammar. They'll be happy to help you. Correct yourself. If you notice a mistake during a conversation, don't be afraid to correct it. Saying something like, "Oops, I meant to say," shows that you are aware of your mistakes and are improving. Practice regularly and stay consistent. The key to success in any language is consistency. The more often you practice, the faster you'll improve. Set aside time every day to practice speaking English, even if it's just for 10 or 15 minutes. How to stay consistent? Set a goal. Decide how many minutes or hours you want to spend practicing. Spoken English each day. Having a goal helps you stay on track. Create a schedule. Incorporate speaking practice into your daily routine. Whether it's in the morning, during lunch, or before bed, find a time that works best for you. Be patient. Language learning takes time. Don't expect to be fluent overnight, but celebrate your progress along the way. Keep practicing, and you'll see improvement.